In the spring of 1622, the Ottoman Empire, the mightiest power between Europe and Asia, was already trembling from within. For nearly 3 centuries, sultans had ruled through fear, wealth, and divine authority. But that illusion of control began to crack with one of the empire's youngest rulers, Sultan Osman II. When Osman tried to replace Janissaries after his disastrous campaign against Poland in 1621, the Janissaries struck back. What followed was not a coup in silence but an open mutiny inside Topkapi Palace, the heart of imperial power. Palace servants fled. The royal guards hesitated. No one knew which side would win. Within hours, the sacred walls of the Sultan's private quarters turned into a killing ground. Osman was dragged from his chambers, beaten, and locked in the Yetikule fortress, once a treasury of the empire and now its most feared prison. He was only 18 years old. Days later, the Janissary leaders ordered his death. The execution was carried out by Bastanchi guards, men trained to obey without question. To preserve the dignity of royal blood, the method chosen was strangulation with a bowstring of silk, a silent, bloodless technique reserved for princes and sultans. Osman II became the first Ottoman ruler murdered by his own troops. For the first time, everyone understood that the Ottoman ruler was no longer untouchable. Inside the palace, paranoia spread like disease. The murder of Osman II marked a turning point. It was not just the fall of a young sultan, it was the birth of an era of secret violence and internal terror. Inside the harem, discipline was enforced by the chief black eunuch, known as the Kislar Agassi, one of the most feared men in the Ottoman world and carries the punishments. The Ottoman court develops a method of execution designed to avoid royal bloodshed and public spectacle, strangulation with a cord of silk or bowstring. Reserved for members of the dynasty, favored concubines. And anyone whose death must remain clean. This method is carried out indoors by trusted palace executioners, often Bastanchi guards. The victim is seized, bound, and the cord is placed around the neck. Pressure is applied until breathing ceases. The technique leaves no open wound and produces no bleeding on palace floors, preserving the ritual and symbolic purity of the palace. Contemporary chroniclers and foreign envoys repeatedly note the preference for quiet, discreet deaths inside Topkapi. Silk strangulation becomes the coded, institutionally accepted way to remove someone deemed a threat while maintaining imperial dignity. When visibility must be eliminated entirely, the palace sometimes resorts to kuvula koymak, placing a person in a sack weighted with stones and casting it into the Bosphorus under cover of night. This method removes both body and evidence from the palace and city. It is used for concubines or servants whose removal would provoke gossip if simply vanished. Records from travelers and some Ottoman administrative notes reference disappearances and rumors of bodies lost at sea, and the geography of Istanbul with its straits and currents makes this an effective way to erase a life without trial or announcement. The practice is secretive by design, no public execution, no paperwork, and no forum for dissent. The kafes is a form of long-term confinement rather than physical torture in the narrow sense, but its effects are devastating. Princes, and occasionally women of the court, are placed in isolated rooms or small suites within the palace, watched constantly, forbidden substantive contact, and denied roles in public life. Light, movement, and social interaction are strictly limited. Over months and years this produces cognitive deterioration, emotional collapse, and loss of political capacity. The kafes functions as both preventative security, removing claims to power, and as punishment. It erases identity and agency without visible bloodshed. Ottoman administrative practice and later palace memoirs document succession politics where confinement in kafes neutralizes rivals while preserving the formal lineage of the dynasty. Less final but socially devastating punishments include whipping, head shaving, and enforced public humiliation. Eunuchs or palace officers administer lashes for disobedience or breaches of protocol. Haircutting publicly signals disgrace and removes feminine status within the court. In some cases, women who divulge secrets or commit what the court defines as moral transgressions are subjected to corporal chastisement or publicly demoted, stripped of titles, garments, and privileges. These measures serve to reassert hierarchical control and to deter others. The penalty is social death as much as physical pain, designed to make a person permanently invisible and vulnerable inside the palace system. A common administrative punishment is forced removal from the imperial household. A concubine may be banished to a provincial household, sold into another master's service, or assigned to menial labor in remote imperial properties. Such displacement strips the woman of her name, rank, and royal protections. She becomes another anonymous slave or servant. Official decrees, estate ledgers, and correspondence show transfers of personnel away from Topkapi as a disciplinary tool. Banishment functions as a structural method of erasure. The empire uses its vast territory and networks to scatter inconvenient people so they cannot return or testify. Palace intrigue frequently employs covert methods of killing, slow-acting poisons slipped into food or drink, adulterated medications, or medically staged illnesses that lead to death without formal accusation. Poisoning fits the court's need for secrecy. It can mimic natural causes and avoids legal complications. Numerous traveler accounts, diplomatic dispatches, and rumor maps of the period describe sudden deaths among courtiers and concubines attributed by outsiders to palace poisonings. The covert nature of these murders protects both perpetrators and the institution by masking political eliminations as misfortune. As a final category, the palace uses deprivation as punishment, severe restriction of food, denial of medical care, isolation from light and company, and enforced sleep deprivation during interrogations. These measures weaken the body and mind and can lead to submission, illness, or death without the need for formal execution. Deprivation is administratively controllable and leaves no overt traces of violence in public records. It operates within the harem as an efficient tool to force obedience or to neutralize troublesome individuals. Among all who served in the imperial palace, none inspired more unease or silent authority than the black eunuchs, known in Ottoman Turkish as Kizler Agilari, the chiefs of the girls. They were not born within the empire, nor were they free men. Most came from East Africa, captured through the slave trade from regions such as Sudan, Ethiopia, and Somalia. As children, they were sold to traders, castrated in brutal conditions, and transported across the Red Sea or North Africa to Istanbul. The castration, performed outside Ottoman lands to comply with Islamic law, was intended to ensure both loyalty and incapacity for sexual relations, a prerequisite for their future service within the women's quarters of the palace. Once inside the Ottoman court, these eunuchs were trained in discipline, literacy, and palace protocol. Over time, they became the only men allowed within the sacred boundaries of the imperial harem. Their primary duty was to guard the sultan's wives, concubines, and daughters, maintaining the absolute separation between the male and female worlds of the palace. But their role went far beyond physical security. They served as messengers, administrators, and silent observers of every secret, every alliance, and every betrayal within those walls. At the top of this structure stood the Kizler Agassi, one of the most powerful officials in the empire. He controlled access to the sultan, managed enormous financial resources, and often influenced political appointments. His authority extended even over the Grand Vizier in certain matters concerning the royal family. The chief eunuch's control of palace correspondence, endowments, and the royal treasury made him indispensable and untouchable. But this power came at a human cost. The eunuchs lived in a world between worlds, not fully accepted by the men of the court, yet not part of the harem they protected. They were bound by lifelong service and complete silence. Punishment for disobedience or betrayal was swift: exile, execution, or disappearance. Despite their influence, they remained slaves, their lives entirely dependent on imperial favor. Their presence ensured the harem's isolation. Every entry and exit, every letter, and every whisper was filtered through them. The same hands that carried gifts from the Sultan could also carry orders of death. If a concubine was to be strangled or drowned, it was usually the eunuchs who escorted her to her fate, calm, precise, and obedient. They maintained order through fear, not violence of their own making, but the violence of the system they upheld. By the 17th century, the eunuchs' network reached far beyond the palace. Many became patrons of mosques, schools, and charitable institutions, using the wealth they accumulated through royal connections. Some even acted as intermediaries between foreign diplomats and the Sultan's court. Yet despite this immense influence, their personal stories remain largely erased, names missing from records, graves unmarked, voices silent. The black eunuch stood at the center of the Ottoman harem's paradox.